I just said, I didn't do that on my own, by the way. And if it sucks, I definitely didn't do it, if you have an experience with that. So thanks, it's really good to see everyone. Hope the lunch was good, the conversations were good, the previous session was good. I'm here to talk less about sort of the aspirational, the high values, and more about like in the weeds, in the dirt. I'm gonna get a little gritty here, talk about what it's actually like to build a TPM organization. So that's gonna feel pretty vulnerable to say some of this stuff, but it's okay, because I think part of this is sharing stories. So the story I want to tell you today is like the hero story. The good news is that the hero is TPM, TPMs, and there are multiple heroes. This is not about a hero. This is about how GitHub pulled together a team of stellar TPMs and built from nothing to a high-performing TPM organization. So just like the hero's journey, you start off, you're bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and then you go through some stuff. And 2.5 years later, you get out of that stuff, and things are peachy. You can imagine there's a bit of a story there, so I want to share that with you. Like the Android story, I'm standing here, but I represent a whole team of people who are here, there, on the video, so I just want to make sure you understand that this is not me, this is a team. And we went through it together, and we're kicking butt together as well. So let me start with the end of the journey. What did we learn? Well, I can't speak for the whole team. I guess I just said I am, but I'm not, but I am. The things I took away from our journey, actually, were these three. Number one, define the work that the TPMs are doing clearly. The subject, what do we work on? And once you know what you're working on, then it's easy to focus. If you don't answer that question, it's well nigh impossible to focus. It's not a thing, right? The second thing is, once you know what you're working on, how are you going to do it? And that gets to clarity around the role of TPM. And I think we often find ourselves sort of dabbling in people's areas as well. And it can sort of look like we're doing someone else's job. And sometimes they even tell us that. And I got some stories I'll get to in a second. I see some wincing already. It's good. And finally, this notion that really came home to me at GitHub, which is this notion of shipping to learn, experimentation, looking at evidence, looking at the data. Try something and adapt. Don't just think about it and talk about it. Do something. So with that, I do want to share a tiny bit of context as well, because I think really a part of this story is stories don't exist outside of context. So I want to tell you a little bit about me and why that's important. And then I want to tell you a little bit about GitHub so that you understand whether you should even like keep sitting in this room or just go somewhere else because it's not relevant, right? So that's a weird offer, but I'm making it. So the first thing is that here are my hashtags. You may have detected some weirdness with my accent. Don't let that distract you, but tomato is the only way to say that word. I got into technology through that I think it sort of sounds atypical, but I think if we talk in the room here, it's a relatively typical journey, which is it's my own journey. It's a little different, and we all have that different journey, but for me it started with digitized mapping and getting into scripting, and now here I am, head of TPM. I also love biking. Got nothing to do with this presentation, but I definitely will take questions on it later, because I love it. My bicycle is magenta or lilac, and you'll detect that from the slide theme here. But bikes aside, the thing that you really should know about me is the bias I bring to the conversation, which is I've been in technology for 20 years. I've worked in a certain kind of technology, mostly software, some software engineering. I was like a bad engineer. I got paid for it, but not enough to get paid a lot. But that's where I land up here, is after 20 years of doing that, building organizations as a manager for the last 15 or so. That's where I come from, which may hopefully explain why I describe things the way I do. I'm coming at this much more from an organizational perspective and a lot less from an individual TPM perspective at this point. The other thing is I work at a company that is a very certain kind of company, which if you're from around here, it's like, yeah, that's a company. But if you're not from around here, that's a special kind of company. It's been around for about 15 years. It's a .com classic, sort of a classic .com, back when that was a thing. Now it's just a SaaS company. It's a company with a boatload of software engineers who build software so that software engineers can build software. So it's a very particular kind of environment we work in, and that will become relevant as I start talking about our engineering centricity of what we do and how we think about stuff and how that drove decisions. So the reason I mention this stuff, again, is so that you understand where I'm coming from, because context is everything. It doesn't mean I'm right. It just means that's our lived experience, and it works at GitHub. It works at GitHub now. This is a journey. The reason I love the model that I'm going to use to tell the story through, which is Tuckman's model from 1965, is that it's a super practical model. At its very simplest, it provides words we can use to describe situations we find ourselves in. Even the words, being able to say to someone, hey, this isn't going well, I think we're in the storming phase, at least lets you give it a label and a name and makes it okay to talk about it, versus saying, well, this is a show. But I think storming carries more weight, it sounds more professional, but it actually gives it a name, right? From forming, through storming, through norming and performing, it seems very linear. But the other thing I find about this model that makes it really practical is it really helps you understand if you're getting stuck or stopping or pausing. And it also helps you reconcile the fact that sometimes it can feel like you're going backwards, but sort of like a scaled model where as an entire organization, you can feel like you're doing pretty well progressing, but then you'll have a situation like, hey, this little area over here, I think we're taking a step back. That's okay, but at least it lets you realize what you're dealing with and not say, oh my God, this is all going to hell in a handbasket. No, we can just say this one area needs some attention. So it's a really, really practical way of dealing with that stuff, and which is why I like it, and that's how I'm going to tell the story. This is weird. Where's my tie? I'm using kind of silly pictures of me because I don't want to just slap a bunch of pictures of the team on here. Maybe that's a missed opportunity. But again, I want to reiterate that this is not me. This is a team, truly. I'm just here talking about it. So we get to the story. We're forming. The team's coming together, and everyone shows up like this is going to be great. This is awesome. Bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, what could possibly go wrong? Nothing. It's going to be incredible. It's amazing. Yes? No? Yes? You don't buy it? No? Thank you. All right. You don't know there's storming coming. You just know we're forming. I shouldn't have shown you that slide. I knew it. So GitHub realized in very late 2020, actually, and early 2021, that we had a question that our chief product officer at the time, who's now our CEO, was asking. I need to know how these key initiatives are going. I need to know how these key projects are going. Pretty straightforward question. What's the answer? What do you do for a living? What's the answer to that question? TPM. That's the answer. However, there's a second question that was implicit. That was an explicit question. The implicit question is, because I'm not quite sure I'm getting the whole story right now. And you'll see how that implicit question that was never really said out loud really colored how the organization initially formed and then stormed. So there were people in a TPM role at the company already. They had been hired sort of by particular VPs. They were sort of sprinkled around the organization, which is a very typical story. Some of them are here, right here in the front row, so you should talk to them afterwards. They'll tell you whether we're still storming or not. But we gathered those people together and formed a team that could help just answer that question, but validate the question and validate the answer as well. So in like the first half of 2021, it says I've been talking for 29 minutes already. That seems not right. It's been 10. Okay. The team was about 25 people, so when you gather up a bunch of people from around an organization of about 3,000 people, it's like a decent-sized team. There was a lead. She's sitting up front here. There were some open roles. That was a while back. And we'd started to do some things that look very familiar. It's probably a little difficult to read the words here, but the point is that partnership, technical program management, problem solving are very familiar terms to you if you've kind of come into this situation fresh and you're like, here's what we're going to do. Let's do this. So not just principled perspective, but also let's put a little framework in for how we're going to do it, because we like to be structured in this gig. By the second half of that first year, we're in that mode of stabilization. That's where we wanted to be, I should say, because we got another phase coming, which I teased. It's called storming. At this point, the team had stabilized, actually, at around 25 people. There were a couple of leads in there. And there was starting to be some experimentation. For example, rather than have a role called TPM, we had 3 kinds of roles that were all doing that type of work. We had a sort of a business program manager, business TPM, a really core software TPM, super deep technical on specific topics. And then taking a hint from the lean world, the agile world, we had agile coaches as well who would go in and help these organizations or teams kind of function better over time. So that was the experimentation. But the portfolio was one that had still been handed to us, right? The CEO was like, here's the stuff I care about. There you go. Which for a TPM is like, well, maybe we should think about the portfolio. Maybe we should examine the reasons why those are projects. They're at vastly different scales. One looks like a little initiative or a project, and the other looks like a humongous cross-company program, but they're all just stuff on his to-do list or his punch list. So, you know, we were dealing with that. But if you look at this incredibly exciting graphic, if you're a TPM, this is thrilling. You'll see that there's a very typical kind of progression through how at least we intake new work, so that we're not like loading up on a bunch more stuff. So there's good progress being made here. But when I joined the company in January of 2022, I'd say it was a case where there were some highs and there were some lows. Or there were some lows and there were some highs. I was the high, by the way. I joined the company, so that's the company. I'm the high. That was the good part. I'm looking for some laughs. Yeah, okay, maybe not. I'm not looking for laughs. It's not a comedy show, but it's true. I did start, and I wasn't high. And, but all jokes aside, though, this was one of those situations I think we've all been in where the analogy is like, hey, someone ordered a tasty pizza. That pizza was TPM. The tasty bit was we're going to have impact, we're going to bring clarity, we're going to manage risk, we're going to surface risk, we're going to do all that stuff. The bit where you started to sprinkle like candy on top of the pizza to make it less tasty or just kind of confusing and weird was the realization that part of running programs and part of getting buttoned up on this stuff is to actually surface risk, which sounds like talk about unresolved problems, talk about difficult things. And that's where it's like, I love the pizza, but you guys keep putting candy on it. What's up with that? And that came from that second question, the implicit question from the person who asked for this, the CEO, which is, I want to know how it's going, and I think there's some stuff I don't quite understand yet, and it's not going to make people comfortable. That's the part that led us to the next phase here, which is, you guessed it, a little storming. So this is me after a bike ride. I told you I like biking. I was happy in this picture. But you know that phase where you kind of get to it and you're like, stuff's getting real? And it's like, okay, like the tie's off, the button's undone. How about we just don't? Like, let's not. That's the mindset, right? You're kind of there. But honestly, that really means, if you look at this through the model, it's like, hey, I think we're storming here. I think we have some unresolved decisions to make or things to work through. And instead of being scary, you can just sort of talk about it. For example, and this is where it's going to seem a little bit like I'm airing dirty laundry, but I just want to give you some real stuff so that you know it's not all rainbows and unicorns. It is now. But what was that? Horses and rain clouds? I don't know. But I showed up, for example, this is my experience, and was talking to folks about what I thought TPM was and what they were going to do, like how we work, what we're going to work on. And I started to draw diagrams because I was getting so confused about where the conversations were going with my stakeholders, like the heads of product, head of engineering for my area. And there was a lot of this, but no agreement, right? I could tell, right? There's a lot of head nodding, but like they definitely do not agree. We are absolutely not on the same page here. If you go back a few slides, not because there wasn't a framework, not because we didn't understand it, not because we hadn't done well for the first year, it's because it's a journey, right? Not everyone's on the same speed, on the same pace. And so I basically started to realize, and I think the other folks who started at the same time and the people who were already on the team were like, yeah, okay, we should like face up to the fact that this is a thing we got to work through with our stakeholders. Because they would ask really great questions. This is why it's storming. They would say stuff like, hey, I worked at big company X, and part of my job was doing what you do. I'm like a product manager, and I know how to do like 70% of what you're doing. Why the hell do I need you? They would say it a little more politely than that, but to me, that's an opportunity for education. It's an excellent question. It's worth responding to. It's worth considering. It may come out a little rude, but that's one example. Or other things that look like a chance for us to reflect. Oh, this is a decision we need to make. Hey, I'm an engineering leader, and I work with someone on this program over here, and then I go to a different meeting, and I'm working with someone else who's a TPM over here, and it's like this radically different experience. It feels like whiplash. Now, is that a feature, or is that a bug? Right? It's a good point of debate. It's not. I mean, I think we can all agree that probably the extremes are extreme, but there's a lot of latitude in there for that conversation, and so then it would get a little spicier. Like, hey, isn't TPM basically some rebranding of some agile mumbo jumbo and nonsense? Like, well, that's really harsh, dude. But like, okay, I see where you're coming from. Number one, take a class. Probably Prashanti's EQ class, I'm guessing. But if you think about it, that is actually a really good opportunity for education. If you take that how someone may even mean it, it's their frustration coming through, but it's a perfectly valid question that requires an answer. But that's where storming comes in, because you got to agree on what the answer is before you can go talk to someone about the answer, right? You can't just go tell them, get over it. Right? You have to have a reasoned, realistic answer for how that's going to work. But what it really came down to, ultimately, in a lot of cases, was trust. Hey, we got the explicit question, how's it going? The implicit one was like, you're asking a lot of questions that require some trust before we're going to tell you that stuff, my friend. And so that, to me, was an opportunity for building partnerships. But by golly, did it feel like storming. That's a pretty, I don't know, have you all been, like, you have a show of hands who's been in a conversation like that? Okay. I'm going to buy you all a drink afterwards. Like a soda. A soda, yeah, not that kind of drink. Let me give you an example of where this show, I said there's an opportunity for reflection, introspection, and for us to get our own conversation right before we go approach our partners. This is a good example where, as I said, I was the high point, I was joking. We had a few leaders come in early 2022 who came from other companies, our own points of view, our own perspective, our own ideas of how TPM could be, should be, must be. And this is a great question. Hey, a GitHub context, at GitHub, should our programs cover all of the company priorities, which spread across all of the functions? Or do we think we should focus more on engineering, because it's a bunch of engineers building software for engineers to engineer on, right? That's a really, really good debate to have, and something we had to have. The unfortunate part, which is where storming starts, is when someone moves from, we should do that, to, screw it, I'm just going to go do it. And we're like, well, that's confusing for people on the receiving end of that one, because guess what? Other people are going to go over here and say, no, I'm going to focus over here on the same topic. Availability only, hard boundary, for example, and over here, ship a new product with a billing platform underneath it and make sure we're tied in with go-to-market, marketing, all that stuff. Those are perfectly valid. Your organizations probably do that or something in between, and for us, we had to decide it, but we weren't doing ourselves any favors here because we hadn't agreed. We just went off and started doing it in two different ways, which is extremely confusing for our partners. Friction and confusion abounds. Okay, so this is a picture of me listening. I may just look angry. That's my resting, angry, listening face. But this is all about getting to a place where you can get in a stable spot with more agreement than disagreement. That's what it means to get to norming. You shouldn't mistake that with perfection, and I'll explain why in a second. But I want to talk to you through a few stories here about how we approach that around two things. Number one, the work. What do we work on? And the second one is, how do we do it? One of these big breakthroughs for that conversation I was just alluding to about, well, do we do the whole thing, or do we do the engineering thing? This just big breakthrough for me personally was this notion of a center of gravity. Much of what we do as TPMs at GitHub is extremely engineering-centric, but it definitely reaches out to other parts of the company depending on what we're doing. So it was kind of that like, well, let's not be weird about it. Let's not be dogmatic and say it's got to be one or the other. Let's be realistic and say, if we have a center of gravity engineering for some programs, let's recognize that for other programs, like ship our AI product to 1 billion people, that definitely gets into the product space. And so this is, the diagram is from our mid-2023 strategy document, actually, where we were trying to describe this. And the power of this diagram right here is it represents an agreement that we could then take and put in a strategy document to go show to everyone who's interested so they got it. That's what it means to norm. Let's take a more specific example, which may be close to home for some of you here. Should TPMs work on release management? And I chatted with some folks at lunch who are totally doing that, which is great. That works for them. That makes a ton of sense in their business, and it probably sounds like it would go belly up if they weren't doing that and keeping a close eye on it. But GitHub's not that company. GitHub's GitHub, and we have a certain way of doing things. We do multiple releases a day. We do some bigger releases a few times a month. So if we had to answer it for us. So that's where guiding principles start to be your friend for alignment. So that's something I feel really strongly about. If you can agree, and as it gets messy at first, and then you slowly coalesce on simpler and simpler statements you can use to make decisions. So we started out saying, should TPMs work on release management at GitHub? And our starting point was, well, programs are a collection of projects. We're like, what? How in the hell does that help you answer that question? And the answer is it doesn't. So we're like, well, okay, well, let's try again. We're like, let's get a little spicy. Let's use some RFC style language. It looks like yelling. Must not. Programs must not be operational. Now, does that have to be a true statement? Of course not, right? In your organization, it may be the opposite. Must be operational. Totally fine. For us, we're like, let's be a little controversial with ourselves and see, does that help us decide something? And we're like, actually, yeah, it does, because we talked about it. And we're like, we don't want programs to be purely operational. We don't mind it if someone starts off something, like starts that machine running, builds the crank, and starts rolling. That's really, really good TPM work at GitHub. But like, if you're standing there like 6 months later, like, why the hell am I, like, what? And again, for us, that context for us, that's not something we wanted to do for long. Or if we did, we wanted it to be a clear choice and decision in that case. So we do, in fact, have one release that we run. In fact, Alexandra's right here. So like one of our highest revenue products is a big freaking deal that release goes okay. That's a choice based on that principle, rather than a happy accident or a happy mistake. So where we actually ended up with this is a statement that says programs likely, not must, likely cover one-time work or first-time work. That's how we actually ended up. That's the thing we use to decide whether or not we should do work as TPMs. It's not the whole story, but that's a piece of it. So where does ship to learn come in here? As you can tell, that was a sequence of questions. We didn't get it right at first. It's a journey. So what we did is take a decision we're trying to make. This was one about how we're going to run as an organization in TPM, weekly reports, quarterly reviews, monthly team meetings, biannual portfolio reviews, all that stuff, and say, well, we're definitely not going to get it right the first time, but how about we at least start? And this is something we did, and again, it's not just me. I just didn't want to slap everyone else's picture on the screen here, okay? So this is a team game. But this is a case where we're like, hey, demos, not memos, people. Try it, ship it, figure it out. Stop writing, do it. And this here, which may get an ironic chuckle from my peers here, but since I'm a big writer. But anyway, the notion here is that you won't get it right, but in the norming stage, you have to accept that you need to iterate and learn and use the evidence and get feedback. So for example, in this case, just last week, the team was providing great feedback about like, yeah, it's going fine, I guess, but you know what, these 2 things, you need to change that stuff. You know, like we need to stop doing the thing once a month. I'm like, that's really good feedback, let's stop doing that. But like if I'd let perfect be the enemy of good, we'd still be wondering how the hell we run the team, which is not a productive place to be in. I'll give you an example of another decision we made that really, really helped us in terms of a principle of operation, which took us a long time to get to, which is that a program, let me back up. If you recall, I said that when TPM was founded, there were like a bunch of TPMs spread all over the organization, right? And they were kind of aligned with vice presidents, their VPs. They were helping them run their teams. They were running programs. They were doing it all. I can only imagine. So something we figured out, or I guess we didn't figure out, we just decided. It's a choice. Is it perfect? No. Does it drive clarity? Yes. It's to say programs are wiggly boundaries around organizations that represent a goal. What do TPMs work on? Programs. What are programs? A collection of projects, definitely not operational, one-time, right? But the other thing we say is that it's driving an outcome. If you are not driving an outcome, it ain't a program, and you probably shouldn't be working on it. If your work looks like help the organization run better, that's excellent work, just not for a TPM, because that's not what we work on. So this was a really big moment. I'm not going to say this was comfortable, but I got to draw a cool picture, and it somehow helps us make decisions. Let me get to the role and talk a little bit about that. And I just want to do a shout out for, I think actually Mr. Dayhuff is in the, look at your name on a slide, sir. I just want to say, I was talking about like the spicy questions people were asking, and I just want to say that we answered those questions. Like the spicier the better, right? I like literally wrote that stuff down and put flame emojis on. I'm like, oh yeah, let's go there. And write down a reasoned, thoughtful response so that people know we heard them, we understood their situation and their frustration or their confusion, and we answered it. And we leaned heavily on our own self-reflection and also this community. We read a lot. We talk to people. We like the stories we hear. So we really benefited from this community of TPMs while we're trying to figure this stuff out. But ultimately, for us, we had to boil it down to a list of things that TPMs at GitHub are going to be held accountable for. Why do we need that? Number one, so TPMs know what to do. The second one is that so we can tell our partners what to expect. Now, this list is, you're probably like, hey, Captain Obvious, yes, risk management, right? It doesn't have to be complicated. It shouldn't be complicated. It should be pretty obvious. But it takes a lot of conversation to get there. But the real key, to me at least, is taking it from the, like we communicate. It's like, well, if someone joins GitHub as a TPM, they're like, that's neat. What the hell does that mean? How do you do that, actually? What does it look like? How do I know if I'm doing okay or failing? And so for us, what we did is gathered a statement about what that means for everyone to look at, including our partners, and then a lot of examples to make it real. Oh, what's a comms plan? Here are 5 examples. They all look different. That's okay. Like, we don't need to be dogmatic. We just need to be clear so people know what to expect. And we could pull all of that into a charter that anyone at GitHub can understand, and we put it all front and center. These statements here, I know you can't read them, and that's not the point, but the idea is that we can kind of get to the short version after a lot of discussion and a couple of years of sort of slowly getting to that ship to learn, so that we've got a very clear focus we can explain to anyone at the company. We know who our audience is, and they know exactly what outcomes to expect from us. And then there's a lot that's on the bottom of the, well, it's off the bottom of the slide. The screenshot keeps going. The other thing that this kind of led us to with this idea is some uncomfortable conversations about, well, how do the VPs then run their organizations, actually, if you're going to say TPM doesn't do it? That was an interesting conversation. I'll refer you to Jen for all the exciting details of sticky notes and whiteboards in a meeting in Fort Collins about how this happened. But basically, this let us tease apart what TPMs were doing from what we now call a technical business operations manager, like technical chief of staff. The T is really important, but those people help run the organizations, and program managers, TPMs, run the programs that drive goals that are wiggly boundaries around those orgs. So now we're performing. What does that look like? Well, it means that we can come up with a repeatable process. We can talk about our super top secret spreadsheet here. You know, and we can ask basic questions because we have a really good understanding of what does a TPM do on the list of things. We know what the list of things have to be, and we can answer questions like, do we have enough funding? And if not, we have a good way now to reason about the stuff we work on and what to expect from people so that we can draw cut lines or go and ask Jen for extreme amounts of headcount. I will give anyone $5 if you go to Jen afterwards and say, Jen, give Dylan 58 people. I am hiring, actually. But that was the most excited I got in this presentation, to yell that. And then tie it to the strategy as well. Why TPM? Why these programs? Why now? And put it all in one spot. So this norming phase is what lets you get to that crisp, clear articulation of what we're going to work on, why we're not going to work on some things, and what trade-offs need to happen there. And we also have great evidence that we're having impact. This is a blog post written by TPM on the team. It's public. You should go read it if you want to learn what it means to run a large-scale program at GitHub successfully. But we're having impact weekly, monthly, and long-term, if you see here. To me, the most exciting trailing indicator of that positive impact is getting people promoted to like principal level, where, I don't know about your company, but for us, principal means not that you just kick butt repeatedly again and again and do amazing work. It means that you're having massive business impact, and that's where it actually counts. So, in closing, had to get a cat in there. Yay, cats. We went on a Waymo yesterday, and I could have sworn there was a cat driving, but I don't think so. So just to wrap it up, the reason I really like this model, as I said, is that I think we actually all experience these stages if we think about it and use the words and the labels a little bit. And it really helps normalize having hard conversations. But more than anything, I love the way it lets me tell some stories in context. And if I say we were storming here, it doesn't feel like an indictment or we messed up. It's a recognition that, hey, we all do it. It all happens to us. And it's a way of talking about things. So I'm just about done. I got 2 questions for you. What problem are we solving? This is one that drives me nuts. Because every time I want to run, go, my colleague Natty, who's my peer, will like, what problem are you solving, Dylan? And he asks it in such a serene way, and it drives me bonkers, because it's the perfect question to stop me from going from forming straight to storming. Like I skip opportunities there. So to me, this is a question I find myself, I ask myself frequently now, much to my chagrin and benefit. And the other part of this is why now? Ship to learn, but why ship to learn that thing unless you need to right now is something that I've just sort of learned and taken on as a lesson from this whole journey personally. And what is the shelf life of those decisions? I have a ton of examples that I didn't have time for today. I'm happy to take questions now or talk to you afterwards, but that's the wrap. That's the journey. Thank you. I'm telling you, $5 if you tell Jen. She's paying.
Thanks, Dylan, for a very informative session. So this is Pankaj. And one very basic question I have is that you also mentioned it that is a linear sequence which Tuckman model is representing. So in reality, what happens is that organizations, generally reorganizations happening, people are leaving. So in practically, it is possible that, okay, that you are at a higher level, maybe in performing level, But because of these issues, you might have to go back into the lower levels. So maybe in GitHub, this is something which has happened.
Oh, yeah.
But in such situations, how do we handle it? How do you manage that? What would be the strategy of, again, going back and forming and norming and performing, making performing teams?
Well, I think I always, you know those fractals, right? Where you kind of zoom in, it just looks the same. You zoom out, it looks the same. You keep zooming in and out. The pattern is repeated infinitely, right? This, to me, is why that model works, for the reason you said, because some teams may indeed be in a different for a short period of time. So your question is, well, how do you deal with it? I think number one, as a leader and as individuals, we keep an eye on it. And if we have a way to talk about the situation and say, we may not use the word storming, but like, hey, I think we got a bit of a problem here. Like we're like ships passing in the night, or pick an analogy. And I think you listen for those words, or you just observe. Hey, that team doesn't appear to be on the same page about how to talk about the program, for example, right? Is like one of the smells, let's say, like a code smell. You use like that smell, you're like, yeah, that's like, yeah, I think we're starting to head in that direction. And the key there, I think, is to call it out, say what it is, not judge. I mean, maybe judge later, right? Depending on how smelly it is, right? I mean, that's real. But honestly, is to just examine things at multiple levels. I gave you an example where most of the programs that we're running right now are going great. We're doing some reinvestment as part of our biannual review right now, and that means some programs are going to wind down and others will spin up and get changed. They need to reform, not reform, reform, right? And so now, do all the programs need to? No, but that's just like, once you know what to look for, you can spot it a mile off. And I think, yeah, that's what we look for, basically.
Can you hear me? All right.
Yeah.
I'm here. I'm live. So CarMax, where we're from, a couple other people here, we're just starting our TPM transformation journey within our product organization. And
Yep.
So spun up product operations as well as our TPMs, and we're staffed across our different groups.
Mm-hmm.
Something that we're working through right now is we have those high priority initiatives across each group. And then my biggest question is, as you staff TPMs, they get an initial lay of the land, they start working through how they want to govern, execute on programs, lean or heavy maintenance on that. Where do you find, as you wind down a TPM off of a group or off of a program, where do you hit that that hill? You crest over that hill and it's like, this is kind of in maintenance mode, or it's going to be delivered and you don't need somebody to be over it. How do you guys deal with winding that down and then reallocating that person to a higher?
It's a really good question. We're doing it this week. We're in that mode right now, so it's top of mind. I think two things. First of all, you got to trust the TPMs who are on the program. They know best. They have the best information. It doesn't mean that we can't talk to each other and get the lay of the land and maybe have to make a decision, but the TPMs in the area literally have the best information. So that's step one, is listen to them and trust them. It's sort of like trust but verify, right? Then go talk to the partners and talk to others and see, because if you have a program-centric focus, this is my view, rather than organizational-centric, we're going to put 5 TPMs for that VP. Cool. When are they done? Never, right? But if you say, what's the goal? It's like, oh, shoot. I had a conversation with the VP yesterday who's running an error, like, what are the 5 things you're trying to accomplish? Well, we're struggling with planning. Those are the things that come out of, those are the things that are preventing you from achieving the goal. Those aren't the goal. What are we trying to get done? And I think if you pivot to focus on the goal first, you end up doing all the right work. You end up doing the same stuff, but it makes it a lot more obvious when you're done or when you're getting close to done. So that's my advice, would be focus on the goals and the programs and let the TPMs who are working on it do what they feel is right, and they'll do the right thing. And as you get closer to the goal being everyone will look around and it's like, that feels like it's getting pretty close, right? You kind of know. So that would be that's my take. Take the mic. Don't listen to that guy. CarMax is amazing. Yes.
Maybe it is. Okay. Hutch, Product Operations Manager for CarMax. So, selfishly, you mentioned that you broke off product operations from your TPM group. What value and challenges did your product operations team encounter in your initial forming, norming, storming, then finally performing? And then how did that help or either impact your TPM org?
This was a decision we didn't ask for, actually. So GitHub created a product operations org a long time ago. And then over the course of the last year, that the remit of that organization and the size of that organization increased for very good reasons. They needed to do product stuff. And TPMs, this is one of the fascinating bits about having role clarity, is that TPMs were covering a lot of stuff because we like to solve problems. We don't like to see things keel over. And so TPMs were absolutely involved in the function. And then when that new function grew in scope, it was super uncomfortable. We all flew and sat in a room and did sticky notes and whiteboards, the usual stuff, right, to figure out, like, what do we do here? And I'll be honest, not everyone was happy about the outcome of that because it meant it practically felt like a smaller role for TPMs and a bigger role for these other folks who we didn't ask for. But you know what? We realized the pie is freaking enormous. Like, and our slice of it is epic, and we literally can't get to the slice of the pie we have. So why are we frustrated that someone else is taking a piece of the pie when we literally can't, like, if we can't eat our slice? And so for us, it was uncomfortable. It was difficult. It was storming it to the max. And what that took was stepping back and saying, what are we trying to, what goal do we have here? What problem are we trying to solve, and why now? We're trying to solve the problem of our product shipping predictably, more smoothly over time. Are we taking stuff from TPM? I guess if you want to look at it like that, I guess we are, but not really. We're saying, we got it covered now. Now TPMs can go do even more amazing work where they got it. So that was really difficult over the last few months. I had a lot of conversations with folks about that, but ultimately I feel like we made very much the right call there. Does that help? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, well, there's two, let me go front and then back, if that's all right.
Hey, Dylan.
Oh, sorry, back. Yes.
Hey, Vijay from Target. So I have a question on looking at GitHub. Look like you have a centralized TPM team. Many organizations are approaching with a decentralized TPM team, where TPMs are reporting into leaders who have never been TPMs before.
Yes.
How do we approach the same Tuckman model in these organizations, and how do we educate them the importance of TPM and how to get things done?
Well, I don't think and I should state, TPM is a relatively small team within GitHub, so it's not like we have 400 people and a massive PMO at GitHub. We have less than 30, and that's part of a larger engineering operations organization. So that's the first thing, is just that context. But then your question is like, well, if it's more distributed, how do you do the education? I don't think that changes, to be quite honest. I mean, explaining the role is the role. If the role is different because of how you're distributing folks in the team, well, obviously your explanation is going to be different. But I don't believe that that should affect maybe necessarily how you talk about it. For example, I have a slide deck I created that I kind of go around people and sort of like, here's what to expect, here's how to ask for help, it's like, it's a lot of this stuff, to be quite honest. And I just do the rounds and explain to folks what it looks like. And I think it's just clarifying. It's like, well, wait, why do they report to someone? Like, who do they report to? Do I own their time, or are they on loan, or how? I just answer a bunch of questions. This feels like a very unsatisfactory answer, but honestly, I think regardless of how you organize it, the key is explaining to people in simple enough terms so they get it, and they can ask those rude questions, and they get satisfactory answers to those questions, and then you iterate on this on the thing you tell them. Oh, we're going to talk outside? Now I'm worried. He's going to take me out back. All right, yes.
Still got time? Okay. All right, my name is Ting from Amazon.
All right.
So a question about the storming phase.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing, by the way. It was a cool journey to go along with you. So my question is, when you form the team to, basically going through the storming phase, inevitably, I think you will hear a lot of pushbacks from other engineering leaders or whatever leaders, especially if there was a misalignment of the expectation, right? Like, hey, you gotta support me. You gotta support me. Different teams will ask for support from TPM. Some or maybe develop some distrust to the TPMs, especially for the ones you send them to. Like,
Yes.
as a leader, how do you address the distrust or the complaints through the journey?
It's a really good question, and I actually go back to those first principles, because I think if I give you a short example, if you start talking about the person first, hey, why do I not still get Bob or Alice? Like, you took Alice. What's up with that? You're mean. And if I go, let's go back to principles. What do TPMs work on? Why do we drive? What are we here for? I'm not going to say they're going to be happy about this, by the way. They're not happy at the end of this, but at least they're like, well, no. But they know I'm not going to move on it. And I think the ability to go back to some guiding principles and be extremely consistent and say, we had to kill a program. The people weren't happy about it. They were definitely not happy about it. But it's kind of hard to argue with the logic when I'm like, is this a program? First time work, one time work, spanning organizations at least 6 months. Yes, no. I'm like, okay, that's number one. It's not a program. Not a program. I'm not hiring anymore. Should TPMs do the work? What do TPMs do? They communicate, manage risk. And it's like, well, we could help your organization run. I'm not going to put a check on that. That sounds like this T-bomb thing. You need someone to help you run the team. Let's go talk to the right people about that. You need help running your org, right? Not the program. Is that true? Yeah? Okay, cool. You don't actually need a TPM. You need this other role that's awesome, that's going to get you what you want. And I'm not saying all the conversations are like happy, but at least they're super consistent and come from a principle perspective, and I can walk people through it and like, do you understand where I'm coming from now? I'm not saying no because I'm a jerk. I'm saying no because what you're asking for doesn't fit into our mental model of what we do here. Okay. Well, thank you, yeah. Thank you.